Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching. He's old. The girl in the photo of her future husband was crying, but there was no way out. If only she had known. Elizaveta returned home after university as usual. Entering the apartment, the girl immediately realized that something was wrong. There were no lights on in the rooms, although her father was home. Elizabeth quietly walked to his bedroom. John was sitting on the bed, and next to him were some papers. "Hello," the girl said quietly. "Why are you sitting here in the dark?" Elizabeth's father quickly raked all the papers into a pile and put them in the bedside table. "I didn't hear you come in," John said with a poorly concealed sadness in his voice. "Dad, is something wrong?" Elizabeth asked excitedly. The man didn't know how to tell his daughter that her mother had been kidnapped by criminals he had once caught. He didn't know how to tell Elizabeth that his wife might never return, and most importantly, how to tell her that she too was in danger. Elizabeth, the father, began to say, "Please sit down, we need to talk." The girl obediently sat down next to him and looked at her father carefully. "The thing is that, Mom..." The man tried to find the right words. "She disappeared. She didn't come back from her shift this morning. I called her, but she doesn't answer, and no one at work knows anything about where she might have gone." John couldn't tell his daughter the truth, and he didn't know if it made any sense. So he simply informed Elizabeth that his good friends would be looking for Diana, and there was nothing to worry about, but at the same time Elizabeth had to be extremely careful and attentive. Now he himself will drive the girl to the university and then pick her up. Also, the man asked his daughter for a while to limit contact with all his acquaintances and do not go anywhere out of the house, especially when he is at work. The girl did not particularly like this arrangement. She tried to object, but her father was able to convince her of the need for these actions, and Elizabeth agreed to his conditions. Meanwhile, John involved all his connections in the search for Diana, but all was in vain. They couldn't find the slightest clue. Whoever had kidnapped her had done everything very cleanly. In the end, John had to turn to one Jacob, a respected businessman. Everyone knew that he was on the good side of major lawbreakers, but had never had any problems with law enforcement. John had no choice but to ask him for help. Much to the man's surprise, the man quickly agreed to help, but in return he set a condition that Elizabeth must become his wife. The girl's father wanted to object, but otherwise Jacob refused to help. In the end, John decided it was best for everyone. At least Elizabeth would be protected, and it was unlikely that anyone would dare to cross Jacob by doing something to his wife. When the man returned home, he wondered how to tell his daughter. Unable to think of anything better, John told her the truth. He went into Elizabeth's room, sat down on the couch and spoke. "Elizabeth, this is not easy for me to say, but I have to do it. What happened? Did something come out about Mom? Has she been found?" "No. It's not really about Mom I want to talk to you about." "Then what is it?" "Elizabeth, you have to get married." "What do you mean?" The girl was surprised. "Elizabeth, listen to me. It is simply necessary. I can't protect you all this time. I am very afraid that something will happen to you, so I have to protect you in every possible way." "Do you mean that now?" "Yes. Elizabeth, he's a good man. He's got everything. He wouldn't hurt you for anything. Daughter, this is really necessary. Just listen to me, please, and let's not make a tragedy out of this." "Dad, do you realize what you're saying? You're trying to marry me off to a total stranger at 18 years old. I haven't seen life yet." The girl started to shout. "Why do I need some strange husband? I don't want to. I can defend myself." John had nothing left but to convince his daughter of the necessity of this marriage. So he calmly, trying to get through to his daughter, began to tell her the truth about what was really going on in their family. It was difficult for John to find the right words not to frighten his daughter, but at the same time to convey to her the complexity of the situation, so he began the story from afar. I don't know if you remember or not, but we didn't always live in the capital. Once we moved here from a small town because of my promotion. I helped solve a case involving a group of drug dealers. Those guys got locked up almost immediately and for a long time. But they remembered me well. All these years they've been plotting their revenge, and now they've gone on the offensive. We found out that your mom's disappearance is connected to them. And the other day I got a letter saying that this is just the beginning, and soon they will get to you. Elizabeth, my daughter, I can't lose you too. Jacob is a good man. He can protect you and help you find your mom. I'm asking you to put your emotions away. Hear what I'm saying, we need this man, or we're in trouble. Dad, but I'm only 18, Elizabeth whispered, choking back tears. I've never even had a serious relationship, and you're giving me away to marry an old man. Daughter, my darling, just believe me. It's the right thing to do. It's the best thing for you right now. Jacob is 12 years older than you. That's not that much. He wouldn't dare hurt you. But if you can't take it, you can get a divorce later. For now, you have to save your mother. John tried to keep his face in front of his daughter to convince her of the necessity and at the same time the inevitability of this marriage. Elizabeth could not find anything to answer her father. She looked at her father with tear-filled eyes, nodded silently, and went to her room, where she sat for the rest of the evening, silently lamenting her fate. John did not bother her, realizing that now the girl needed to be alone and think about all the information. In the morning, Elizabeth woke up earlier than usual, although it was Saturday and she did not need to go to the university. She lay in bed for a while, remembering yesterday's conversation with her father. After the girl thought it over, she didn't take it so sharply anymore. After a while, smelling a pleasant odor from the kitchen, Elizabeth got up and went there. John was preparing breakfast, and for the first time since Diana's disappearance, he was doing something with such enthusiasm, and it seemed to her that her father had come alive and cheered up a little. She walked quietly to the table and sat down on a chair. Oh, Elizabeth, did I wake you? No. I woke up and smelled a very pleasant odor. Now we will have breakfast, smiled John. At breakfast, the man decided to clarify with his daughter what she decided on their conversation yesterday. Daughter, did you think anything about our conversation yesterday? The girl grew serious in an instant and replied, Yes, Dad, I think that if we have a chance to save Mom, we should take it. After all, it's not such a big price to pay. I'm glad I raised such a sensitive and sympathetic daughter. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's all right, Dad. I understand. After breakfast, John and Elizabeth drove to Jacob's house. The men had arranged the visit the night before. John did not doubt his daughter's prudence. He realized that she would probably agree. So the man wasted no time and arranged a meeting with Jacob to discuss all the details. 2 hours later, John and Elizabeth were there. Jacob invited them to his country home. They were met by a security guard and, after checking their IDs, escorted into his boss's office. Jacob was sitting at his desk looking over some papers. Elizabeth noticed at once that the man looked very solid and expensive, but young at the same time. When John entered the office, he said hello loudly. Good afternoon, Jacob, and we're here as agreed. Jacob answered without looking up from his papers. Yes, have a seat. I'm going to finish up some business and we'll have a chat. After 15 minutes of waiting, Jacob finally summoned his assistant and handed him the papers, instructing him to take them to the bank. Afterward, the man turned his attention to Elizabeth. You look even more beautiful than I imagined, Jacob said with a smile. Thank you, the girl replied briefly. So, you've accepted my offer? Yes. Good. Then you can take a walk in my garden while your father and I discuss some details. I'd like to be there when you talk too, for it concerns me too. Elizabeth, John intervened. You don't need to have this conversation. We will call you when it comes to your wedding. The girl looked at the men unhappily but did not argue any further. She got up from the chair and headed for the exit. One of Jacob's employees was waiting for her at the door, whom he had asked to escort her to the garden and fulfill her every request. "Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth," she introduced herself. "I look after the house here. Jacob asked me to escort you to the garden. If you need anything, you can come to me." "Thank you. My name is Elizabeth." "I know," Elizabeth smiled. They went outside. Elizabeth looked around. The garden was very well maintained. There were many flowers and trees. "Elizabeth, can I ask you something as a woman to a woman?" said Elizabeth, trying to be as nice as possible. "Of course," said the woman. "Anything. Tell me, what is Jacob like? In what way? What kind of man is he? Why doesn't he have a wife?" "Oh, that's what you mean. Jacob has always been a very busy man. He took over the business from his father when he was very young. Then he tried to excel at everything, to understand every detail. And now he's gotten pretty good at business. You know, he is very fair. If someone is wrong, he will always stand up and bring the matter to the end." Elizabeth spoke a little more softly, as if afraid of being overheard. Jacob had never had much luck with women. He'd been too busy doing things, so he hadn't paid much attention to the matter. Now he couldn't stand to be a hobo, so he decided to find a wife. But why didn't he choose a woman who would be really happy about the marriage? I don't know that anymore. But I'll tell you this, a lot of people would want to be in your shoes. Jacob's a good man. He would never allow himself to offend a woman. And if he gives a word, he always keeps it. Elizabeth's cell phone beeped. The woman read the message and turned to Elizabeth. "Come inside, Jacob wants to talk to you." Elizabeth nodded and followed the woman. The girl returned to Jacob's study and walked quietly to the chair. "What do you think of my garden?" Jacob asked Elizabeth. "It's beautiful. I didn't expect a single man to have such a well-tended garden. I'm glad you like it. You can come back whenever you want. Now, let's discuss the details of the wedding." "Elizabeth, do you have any wishes in that regard?" "No," the girl shrugged indifferently. "I don't care at all. This is not an event that I would like to celebrate." "Elizabeth, why are you so?" intervened in the conversation the girl's father. "What about Dad?" "I tell the truth as it is. Or maybe I need to lie to please you all." "Elizabeth, have you no shame? I thought we talked about this morning." "I'm sorry, I'm just still nervous about my mom. What kind of girl wants to have a wedding without her parents?" "It's okay," Jacob said. "I hear you. If you don't want to make a big deal out of it, we can just do it at the registry office and call it a day." "I'd appreciate that," Elizabeth replied good-naturedly. The event was scheduled for the following week. John tried to cheer his daughter up, assuring her that Jacob wasn't so bad and that life didn't end there. Elizabeth nodded her head in agreement, realizing that it was probably really the only way out. On the day of the wedding, Jacob arrived at Elizabeth's house in his car. He went up to the apartment and handed the girl a small bouquet of flowers. The girl immediately noted that these flowers were exactly like the ones she had seen from the man in the garden, although the bouquet was not large, but it was assembled very aesthetically and neatly. "You look beautiful," Jacob said, looking at Elizabeth. "You look great in that dress, and it's a good thing you agreed to wear it." Elizabeth hadn't really planned to dress up, but her father had insisted, arguing that it was necessary to make it look like a real marriage, so that the neighbors wouldn't talk. Especially Anna, who always knew everything about everyone. Eventually the girl gave in, and now she looked like a real bride. "Shall we go?" the girl asked, starting to get nervous. Jacob looked at his future wife with admiration for a few seconds, and then he took her hand and put it gently in his. They walked out of the driveway and got into the car. The girl's father went with them. He just could not miss this event in his daughter's life. The ceremony was held without surprises. After the registration of the marriage, the young people were given a certificate, and they left for Jacob's house. The man organized a small table, but for him, it was definitely a celebration of the end of single life. Toward evening, John said goodbye to his daughter and the owner of the house, and then went home. Elizabeth tried to persuade him to stay, but he said that he had to go to work tomorrow and that it would be difficult to get there. Besides, Jacob hadn't invited him. After kissing his daughter, John got into a cab and drove away. Elizabeth was alone with her new husband. She didn't even want to think about the fact that she had a wedding night ahead of her. Not that she hated Jacob. No. He hadn't done anything wrong to her. He'd always been courteous and gallant, helping her find her mom. But she couldn't go to bed with a man she had no feelings for. She tried to stall for time. First she wanted to help clear the table, but Jacob had called a maid to do it. Then Elizabeth said she wanted to go for a walk after such an eventful day. Jacob didn't mind. He offered to keep her company. Elizabeth agreed. It was a good opportunity to get to know her husband better, to understand why he had decided to marry her in the first place. They went out into the garden. It was pleasantly cool outside, with floral scents coming from everywhere, and cicadas singing somewhere. Under other circumstances, Elizabeth would have been happy to be here, but not now. After a moment of fresh air, Elizabeth turned to her husband. "Jacob, may I ask you a personal question?" "Elizabeth, let's drop the formalities. I'm not so old that you have to call me by my middle name. And you and I are husband and wife now. I don't think that's quite right. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to do it just like that, right away. Okay, I'll wait." "So what was your question?" "Tell me, why me? Why you? Why did you choose me to be your wife? Why not someone else who will love you all your life? Not someone more age, appropriate." "And you don't think you're right for me," laughed the man. "And love stories are not for me anymore. I need a wife who will respect me and will not look only into my pocket. Your father asked me very much for help, telling me how good you are, how I need to help you. You know, I knew right away you were the one I was looking for. And when I saw you for the first time, I realized that you would not be ashamed to appear in society. Well, Elizabeth, it was just a simple calculation. Well, it's late. I'm tired. And I have to get up early for work tomorrow. Let's go inside." Elizabeth obediently followed Jacob into the house. When they reached the second floor, the man opened one of the doors and gestured for her to enter. Elizabeth took a deep breath and stepped into the bedroom. To her surprise, Jacob didn't follow her in. He simply said goodnight, specified that the toilet and shower were in that room, so Elizabeth could rest easy. If she needed anything, there was a telephone in the bedroom, and by dialing a certain number, she could call the maid and voice any request. Jacob would make sure that everyone obeyed her as well as him. The girl thanked her husband, closed the door behind him, sat on the bed and cried, "Why do you ask me if I can or cannot?" Jacob said with resentment in his voice. Elizabeth slept very badly during the night. She woke up every now and then and listened to see if anyone was coming. She was afraid that Jacob would change his mind and decide to fulfill his marital duty, but all was quiet. It was not until morning that Elizabeth heard a light knock on the door. She quickly threw on the terry robe she had found in the bathroom yesterday and opened the door. It was Elizabeth. "Good morning, Elizabeth." "Hello. Jacob asked me to invite you to breakfast." "Ooh. Thank you. I'll be right down." Elizabeth closed the door and went to the mirror. "No, you can't sit at a table like this in a decent house," she said aloud. "But not to put on a wedding dress." Looking around, Elizabeth stopped her gaze on a large closet. It was unlikely that the girl could find anything suitable in it. So, without understanding why, she went to the closet and opened it. A huge selection of outfits appeared before her eyes. This was nonsense. How could they think of everything so well? Or maybe it's someone else's clothes. But having enclosed a couple of dresses, Elizabeth chose one of them. The size was exactly hers, and the dress looked just fine. She walked down to the table like that. Jacob was already drinking coffee and reading something on his tablet. "Good morning," Elizabeth said softly. "Good morning," Jacob replied and looked up at his new wife. "I see you've found your new outfits. Good choice. It looks great on you." "Thank you." Elizabeth smiled with the corners of her lips. "Have a seat." She sat down on the chair opposite Jacob. Elizabeth brought her breakfast, and Elizabeth silently ate. "What are your plans for today?" Jacob asked. "I'd like to go home and get some things," Elizabeth said, and then hesitated a moment. "May I?" "Why do you ask me if I can or can't?" Jacob said with resentment in his voice. "You're free to do whatever you want. I'm not forcing you to do whenever you're home. If you want to go home, you want to go home. If you want to go out with your friends, I'm not forcing you." "I understand. Okay, I won't ask you again." "That's great. I suggest you go home together. I have some things to discuss with your father, so I don't see the point in going separately. The only thing is that I have some business to take care of, but it's only for a couple of hours, and then we can go." "Okay," Elizabeth replied. "You're doing fine," Jacob laughed. "I wish I were." Elizabeth said nothing and continued eating her breakfast. When she was done eating, she got up from the table and wanted to go to her room. But Jacob stopped her. "Wait, let's make a deal. You wait for me at home now. I'll go to the office, and then I'll pick you up and we'll go to your father's." "Jacob, I just remembered Dad said he had to go to work today, so I don't think you'll catch him there." "Yes." "All right. I'll take care of it somehow." After that, the man said goodbye and went to work, and Elizabeth stayed in the house. Out of boredom, the girl decided to walk around the house to see what there is here at all. Despite the fact that from the outside the house seemed small, inside it was just huge. There were many doors that hid some rooms. Opening one of them, Elizabeth found herself in a gym where there were several exercise machines, and all the walls were covered with mirrors. In another room, she found a rather spacious bathroom with a jacuzzi in the middle. The third door hid Jacob's office. Elizabeth knew that, but she decided to look inside anyway. Oddly enough, the door was locked. Elizabeth continued her tour of the house. She found several more bedrooms and shower rooms, a kitchen, and a pantry of sorts. "You can't be in here," she heard Elizaveta's guilty voice. "I'm sorry, I was just wondering what was in this house." "It's all right. If you need anything, you can ask me." "What's in this room?" "It's Jacob's bedroom, and no one's allowed in there when he's not here." "I see. Well, I'll remember that." Elizabeth smiled and went to her bedroom. The girl picked up her cell phone and dialed her father's number. "I'm listening," came the business voice of John, who was obviously busy with something. "Dad, hi, it's me." "I understand, Elizabeth. Do you have something urgent? I'm a little busy." No. No. I just wanted to tell you that I'm gonna stop by the house in an hour to pack some things. And Jacob wanted to come with me to talk to you about something." "I know he did. He called me. I'll be home in an hour." "Sweetie, can we talk there?" "Sure, Dad. Sorry to interrupt." The girl dropped the call and put the phone away. She didn't feel like doing anything, so she just sat in the chair and stared out the window, waiting for Jacob to arrive. He arrived as promised exactly 2 hours later. He went up to Elizabeth's room and asked if she was ready, and when she said yes, they went down to the car and drove to John's. When Elizabeth and Jacob arrived at John's house, he was already home. The man opened the door and looked at his daughter, trying to see if her new husband had offended her. "Good afternoon," Jacob said first. "Can we come in?" Yes, of course, come in." Elizabeth silently entered the apartment, hugged her father, and went to her room to pack. John and Jacob went into the kitchen to talk about what to do next. She could only hear fragments of phrases that made her realize it was about her mother. Jacob had managed to find out something, but there was no way to save her that easily. So it had to be done cleanly, thoroughly, and for sure. A short time later, John entered his daughter's room. "How are you, Elizabeth?" "All right," even better than she expected. She realized at once that her father was interested in Jacob's attitude toward her and how last night had gone. "Jacob didn't hurt you." "No, Dad, I'm fine. Really. It's good that it's good. He promised me he wouldn't hurt you." "Did you guys go over everything you wanted to talk about?" "Not exactly. We're all going to Jacob's house together now. I've arranged a vacation at work, so I'll stay with you for a week." The man smiled slightly. though his eyes were sad. The talk about Diana making him sad. Did you find out anything about Mom? Yeah, there's something. But it's too early to tell. Back at home, Jacob explained that what was needed now was for the kidnappers of Elizabeth's mother to think that they had all gone away. John took a leave of absence from work, and Elizabeth temporarily stopped going to the university as well. The plan worked, and within days a courier was caught delivering the letters. After Jacob's men had worked with him, he gave out some information. Of course it wasn't enough, but now they knew what direction to go and where to look. To avoid suspicion, John returned home, and Elizabeth and Jacob visited him periodically so as not to be seen by the kidnappers. Everything seemed to be going as it should, except for one annoying kid who tried to contact Elizabeth. But Jacob could handle that with a little force. Elizabeth was slowly getting used to her new life. She was even beginning to like Jacob's courtesy. Even though they still lived as neighbors, she wanted to get to know her husband better, and he was only too happy to do so. The man was eager to talk to his wife, but it was more like a conversation between two friends. As time went on, Jacob finally had complete information about Diana's whereabouts, where Diana was and who her kidnapper was. To his surprise, the woman had been in town the whole time, never taken anywhere. Still, you couldn't just go and pick her up. You needed bait. What are we going to do? John asked Jacob on his next visit. The only way out is to frame Elizabeth. Are you out of your mind? John was outraged. Quiet. Don't talk to me like that, Jacob said calmly. My men will keep the situation under control, and nothing will happen to Elizabeth. Hell, yes, I'm as worried as you are. But there's no other way out. If we play it straight now, they'll figure it out and take Diana somewhere we won't find her. We only have one chance. I can't risk my daughter's life. I've already lost my wife, and I can't lose my daughter now. I assure you nothing will happen to Elizabeth. As soon as they are with her, we will take them all and get Elizabeth and Diana. I agree. Suddenly came the voice of the girl who had been eavesdropping under the door all this time. If it will help save Mom, we should take that chance. Elizabeth, but it's very dangerous. John tried to object. What if things don't go as planned and I lose both of you? Dad, if Jacob says everything will be all right, then it will be all right. I have no reason not to trust my husband. Jacob looked at Elizabeth with interest. She had never spoken of him that way before, and he was pleased. Now he realized that their relationship had reached a new stage. But, daughter, Dad, don't talk me into it. I've decided I have to go, so I will. Jacob, what do I have to do? It's nothing complicated. You're going to your father's tomorrow night alone. I think they'll meet you there and take you to the base. We'll follow them and use the surprise effect to pick you and your mother up. Only you'll have to pretend you don't know what's going on, much less expect help. Can you do that? I think I can. Good girl. John didn't approve of his daughter's dedication, but he agreed. But he also made it a condition that his staff would take the bastards. Jacob's only request was that they not interfere prematurely and mess things up. The next day, as planned, Elizabeth drove to her father's house in the evening. 2 masked men were already waiting for her in the entryway. They put a bag over her head, dragged her into the car, and drove away. Jacob's men followed them. Jacob's men stayed in John's apartment in case anyone else showed up. Meanwhile, the girl's father waited for a message with the coordinates of the kidnappers. 2 hours later, the car with Elizabeth's kidnappers stopped. They pulled the girl out and dragged her somewhere again. At some point, they stopped her and removed the bag from her face. Elizabeth looked around. The atmosphere resembled a nightclub. Music was playing. Men were sitting somewhere with half-naked women. Soon, a tall, dark-haired man approached the girl. He looked at her face for a few seconds and then spoke. Well, we have met. And you are even more beautiful than your mother. You're gonna be a star. What's going on? Who are you? "We are your new employers," laughed the man, and everyone else immediately picked up his laughter. After laughing, the man told them to take Elizabeth to the locker room and dress her in an appropriate outfit for her debut. One of the kidnappers led the girl into some sort of closet, pulled out a sort of swimsuit from the closet, and tossed it to Elizabeth. "Get dressed," he commanded in a squeaky voice. "Why? Don't you get it? Alex is in charge here and he ordered you to get ready for your debut. So get a move on and don't do anything stupid. Will you at least turn around?" Elizabeth was trying to buy some time. "No way. So you can try to trick me. No way. Get changed. They're waiting for you." The girl began to slowly pull off her clothes while her escort stood in the doorway and watched her with an eager gaze. When Elizabeth took off her clothes and was left in only her underwear, she looked pitifully at the man watching her. The girl had only one thought in her head. Why is no one coming to her rescue? What if something went wrong? "Why are you standing there? Keep going. You don't have much time." "I can't stand being stared at," Elizabeth said, turning away. "Get used to it," the man laughed. "Now you'll be stared at all the time. And not just staring. Please, I have nowhere to go. You blocked the only passage. I'm not going anywhere. Turn around, please." "I thought I said no. Or do you have a memory problem? Can I at least cover myself with the closet door? You'll see me like this?" The man was clearly sick of all this talk and waved his hand in agreement. Elizabeth quickly grabbed a new outfit and rushed toward the closet. A couple minutes later, she was ready. The new costume barely covered her body parts, so she covered her arms and walked out of the closet. "I'm ready," said the girl. "Finally. Come on, you've been waiting a long time. What do I have to do? Show yourself how beautiful and skillful you are. If you are a good girl, you might even earn a reward." Elizabeth was very scared, but she held on, trying not to show that they had succeeded in frightening her. They walked down a narrow, dark hallway and found themselves in front of a massive door. Elizabeth's escort knocked lightly on the door and then opened it. "Alex, she's ready." "Can I start it?" "Start her up because our guest is getting bored." The man took Elizabeth by the hand and led her into the room. The girl's gaze immediately fell on a structure that looked like a small stage. "Get up," Alex commanded. Elizabeth obediently climbed up on the stage. At that moment, slow music played, and the spotlights came on. "Public domain image from the internet. Now dance." "But I don't know how," Elizabeth tried to object. "You have a great opportunity to learn. Otherwise, we'll have to go straight to dessert, if you know what I mean." Everything went cold inside the girl. Now the thought that help might not come in time became more and more intrusive. Deciding that there was no other way out, and to delay the inevitable, Elizabeth began to dance. She did it really very ineptly, but judging by the fact that the owner of the place looked at her with satisfaction, the girl realized that he was satisfied with this dance. After a few minutes, Alex was apparently bored with Elizabeth's dance. "Now, take off your clothes," he commanded. "But I'm already naked, so take off the rest of your underwear. And let's not be silly. You have no choice anyway. Either you obey and do as you are told, and then you will have time to prepare for a stormy night, or we have to take you by force. What's it gonna be?" "I will obey," answered Elizabeth, and began to remove her underwear, still moving smoothly to the music. When the girl had already taken off her bra, there was a noise outside the door. "What the hell is that?" Alex roared unhappily. "I don't know," the man who had accompanied Elizabeth before answered confusedly. "Then go and check it out, you idiot." The man disappeared behind the door, and Alex continued to speak, already looking at Elizabeth. "Is this your handiwork?" "I don't know what you mean." "All right, if you do. Otherwise, I'll kill you right here and now." After a few minutes, Alex got up from his chair and went to the door. Opening it slightly, he looked out into the corridor. It was dark and he couldn't hear anything. Where did he go, that asshole? Nothing could be assigned. "You two," Alex turned to the guys who'd been in the room all this time, but Elizabeth hadn't noticed them. "Keep an eye on the girl. If she does any tricks, you can hit her, but not in the face. I still need her in a marketable form." After saying that, Alex left the room. Elizabeth wanted to pick up the bra, which she threw under her feet during the dance, but the guards did not let her do it. "Don't move," one of them said angrily. Only now, Elizabeth noticed that they were armed. "Can I get dressed? I'm cold," the girl asked pitifully. "It's all right, you can bear it. You can dance to warm yourself up." Elizabeth decided not to anger these guys, so she did not make any other attempts to get dressed. She just crossed her arms over her chest and remained standing in the center of the stage. The girl could see the guards whispering among themselves, occasionally glancing at her with a lustful look. She guessed that they were talking about her, but tried not to think about it. More than anything, she wondered what was going on outside the door right now. Time seemed to be dragging very slowly. But then the door opened, and Alex came back into the room. He looked very angry and surprised at the same time. "Get out of here, both of you," he growled to his guards and then turned to Elizabeth. "Get dressed quickly and come with me." After these words, the man threw a robe to the girl. She did not argue. Quickly putting on the robe, Elizabeth followed Alex. He led her to the hall where she was brought originally. On seeing her father, Elizabeth rushed over to him. John hugged his daughter tightly. "Are you all right?" he asked. "They didn't do anything to you." "They didn't have time," the girl replied in a whisper. "I brought her," Alex intervened in the conversation. "Now you keep your end of the bargain." "No, you haven't brought everyone yet. Where's my wife?" "I never said anything about a wife. Talk to me again. You're in no position to cross me right now." Alex wrinkled his nose in frustration but nodded. "Wait here." He returned 10 minutes later, dragging Diana with him. The woman looked terrible. She could barely move her legs and couldn't lift her head. "Diana," John rushed over to her, grabbing her out of Alex's arms. "What have you done to her?" "Nothing much. Just overworked," Alex grinned haughtily. "She'll sleep. She'll be fine." Elizabeth stayed back. She looked at her mother in horror and waited for this nightmare to finally end. Soon everyone piled into their cars, including Alex, and drove off in the direction of Jacob's house. The car pulled into the yard of Jacob's house. John got out first and opened the door on Alex's side. "Get out. We're here. I kept my end of the bargain. Got you to Jacob's place safe and sound." "Thank you," Alex replied haughtily. The man jumped out of the car and headed for the entrance, where the owner of the house was waiting for him. "Hello, little brother," Jacob said. "It's been a long time." Hey, you got me after all?" Alex grinned. "Come on in." Jacob and Alex went out the door. Elizabeth looked on in surprise, not expecting her husband to be her kidnapper's brother. Meanwhile, John, not wanting to waste precious time, ordered to take Diana to the hospital. Although the woman slept peacefully the whole way, her condition alarmed him. Elizabeth wished to stay with her parents. When they arrived at the hospital, Diana was hospitalized. She was diagnosed with severe drug intoxication, damage to some internal organs. The doctor said that after the woman comes to her senses, most likely she will need not only medical help, but also psychological help. John and Elizabeth were very worried about Diana, but they had no other options. So they left the woman under the care of the doctors and drove back to Jacob's house. It had been about 4 hours, and they still hadn't heard from him. Elizabeth felt an inner anxiety for her husband. She kept asking to go faster, sensing trouble. Once there, the girl jumped out of the car and ran into the house. "Stop!" her father shouted after her. "It may be dangerous there." But Elizabeth did not listen to him. She had already run into the house and hid behind its doors. It was suspiciously quiet inside. Elizabeth tiptoed cautiously toward Jacob's study and leaned her ear against the door. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't hear anything. She thought the men were talking somewhere else when she heard the sound of breaking glass. Elizabeth even shuddered with surprise, but gathering her courage, she opened the door. Jacob was sitting in a chair with his head in his hands, and Alex was lying in front of him, not showing any signs of life. The girl shrieked and immediately covered her mouth with her hand. She didn't go unnoticed, though. "What are you doing here?" Jacob asked, looking up at Elizabeth. "I was worried about you," she answered quietly. "It's been about 5 hours since we left, and you still haven't called." "You were worried about me?" the man asked in surprise. "I thought you didn't care much about me." "Jacob, why would you do that?" Elizabeth couldn't understand her husband's mood. "I'm sorry. It's nervous." "What about him?" She nodded her head toward Alex. "He won't be bothering anyone anymore," Jacob replied with a sad grin. "You killed him?" Elizabeth was horrified. "And even if I did, so what? He's always been too much trouble." Elizabeth didn't know what to say to that. So she stood silent, staring at Jacob and his brother. The silence was interrupted by the voice of the master of the house. "You're probably wondering what happened here." "Yes," the girl said briefly. "Then I will tell you. I've kept this secret for too long. Alex was my paternal brother. When we were kids, we always played together. We had no secrets from each other. We always helped each other and shared everything. But at some point, everything changed. Alex became distant from me. He had his own company. I didn't like them at once, but he didn't care. He started disappearing a lot at night. My father constantly scandalized him for this, but even here Alex remained in his own way. Eventually he disappeared, and soon our father was gone. His business passed to me, and Alex didn't even show up for the funeral. I found out from my sources that my brother had become a big shot in the criminal world. Something to do with drugs, but it was just his choice, so I let him go and took over the business. After a while he showed up. Alex was scandalized for a long time, saying I'd raided the inheritance for myself. I tried to tell him it was all his fault, but he wouldn't hear of it. All he said was that he'd bring it all back to me. I didn't pay much attention to what he said, but I shouldn't have. About a year later, I met a girl. We were very happy and were going to get married, but Alex stole her away from me. I don't know why she was so attracted to him, but she canceled the wedding and went to him. I suffered a lot, tried to get her back, but it was all in vain. Later, I found out that Alex had put her on some kind of medication. And soon after that, she died. Of course, he was responsible for her death. I'd been looking for him, but he disappeared and hadn't shown himself until recently. Jacob was silent for a moment, as if considering whether or not to tell Elizabeth what had happened. Jacob remained silent, and Elizabeth, who had been standing in the doorway the whole time, cautiously approached her husband. Carefully bypassing Alex, the girl squatted down next to the chair. "And what happened then?" she asked in a quiet voice. "And then what happened was this," Jacob continued. "I've been trying to find my brother for a long time. I wanted to get back at him for the girl I loved. Of course, I realized later that it had been her choice in the first place, and she could have gone to anyone else. But at that moment, I blamed Alex for everything, because he had set it all up on purpose and actually killed Veronica. I asked about him everywhere, but he'd vanished into thin air, and I couldn't find any loose ends. I even tried to build some sort of partnership with the most powerful people in the underworld, but that didn't work either. No one knew where Alex might be. Still, I didn't despair. My hatred for my brother was so strong that I just couldn't let it go. So I think I got lucky. I got a lead on him. One of the guys recognized him, said that he now owned some kind of brothel for special clients, but it was almost impossible to get in unless you were one of his friends. Moreover, the place moved every now and then, and if you found it today, it wasn't certain that it would be there tomorrow. I was making plans to get closer to it, and then your father came to ask for help. I could tell from his story that he was probably dealing with Alex's place. I couldn't pass up the chance, especially when he told me they were after you now. I explained to your father that for your safety, you should become my wife, then no one would dare touch you. That wasn't entirely true. I needed to make you trust me and become a front to find your brother. He agreed, of course. You know what happened next, Jacob summarized. What happened here? Elizabeth glanced at Alex's body. We just had a man-to-man talk with him. I just wanted him to explain to me why he was doing all this and apologize. It wouldn't have brought Veronica back, but it would have made me feel better, I guess. Except he decided otherwise. Alex started blaming me again for the fact that his life had turned out the way it did, that he had to hide all the time and do all the dirty work for a long time. And my Veronica deserved all of this, because she ran over to him so easily. After that, I couldn't stand it. I shot him. That's terrible, Elizabeth exclaimed. He deserved it. Jacob suddenly jumped up from his chair and looked fiercely at his wife. Men like him should not live. He has brought so much grief into this world. So many women he has killed in his establishments. After catching his breath, Jacob calmed down and offered Elizabeth his hand. She held hers out incredulously in return. The man lifted her off the floor in one deft movement and looked her intently in the eyes. Thank you for everything. Thank you for not being afraid and trusting me. Now that you know the whole truth, I can't keep you any longer. You're a good girl, and you deserve a better fate. You can file for divorce tomorrow, and I'll have to answer to the law for killing my brother. At that moment, John came into the room, who had been standing outside the door listening to their conversation for quite some time. How could you? He said angrily, glaring at Jacob. I trusted you, and you just took advantage of my daughter. You have every right to hate me. But I helped you free your wife, and Elizabeth is fine. John grumbled unhappily, but he had to admit that Jacob was right. I'll help you get away with killing that bastard. We'll make it look like he tried to escape when he was apprehended and had no other choice. There's no telling how my wife will live after all his abuse. I probably shouldn't say this, but everyone will be better off after he's gone. John held out his hand to Jacob, and he responded with a firm handshake. Elizabeth, let's go home. You need to clean yourself up. You've had a rough day. Dad, my home is here for now. I want to stay. The men looked at Elizabeth in surprise. They both did not expect her to make such a decision, but they did not object. If no one minds, I'll go to my room, the girl said. Either asking or asserting, Jacob nodded, and the girl went to her bedroom. John went home too, having instructed his boys to take care of Alex's body. Jacob stayed in his office for a while, pondering what had happened. At some point, Elizabeth realized that she felt sorry for Jacob. She imagined how long he had suffered being faithful to only one woman who had betrayed him, choosing someone else, worst of all Jacob's own brother. Even after Elizabeth had learned that their marriage had meant nothing to the man, that it was just a cover. He had always been very courteous and polite to her, never insulting her or mentioning other women to her, sometimes giving her flowers and small things. Now, Elizabeth sat on her bed and tried to figure out how she felt about Jacob. Maybe fate had brought them together for a reason. Maybe she should give the man a chance. On the other hand, she didn't know if he needed a chance or not. After much deliberation, Elizabeth went into the shower. Standing under the jets of water, she washed off all the dirt and unpleasant memories of today. Of course, it didn't help much, but still the water allowed her to relax a little. The girl stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in a towel. The room was dark, with only moonlight coming through the window. Elizabeth walked to her bed and only at that moment noticed that she was not alone. She looked up and saw Jacob sitting on a chair, staring at her. They were both silent for a while. It didn't bother Elizabeth that she was standing in front of a man almost naked. She just waited to see where this was going. Finally, Jacob broke the silence. Why did you decide to stay? Because you're my husband, and I've gotten used to you, even in spite of what you've learned today. The man asked in surprise. Do you still want to be near me? Yes. Elizabeth nodded her head. I think anyone would do that if they were you. Well, maybe not anyone, but anyone who had the opportunity would. What do you want? Jacob asked with interest. I don't know, she shrugged. Maybe we should try to live like a real husband and wife. Why would you do that? The man wondered. Why do you want a man who is so disfigured by life, who is capable of murder and has no regrets about it? He deserved it. cried Elizabeth, who had her mother in her mind's eye. "After what he did to my mummy, he didn't deserve to live. And how many others there were like her that he tortured to death. If it wasn't for you, there might have been more. Prison's no place for them. He'd get out and go back to doing his dirty work." "Well, thank you for your support," Jacob smiled. The man got up from his chair and slowly walked over to Elizabeth. He ran his palm over her cheek, then ran his hand through her hair and froze, looking her straight in the eye. The girl put her hand on his and looked at him too, not taking her eyes off him. At one point she opened her lips slightly, as if to suggest that she was ready for more intimacy. Jacob's reaction was quick, and he gently tilted his head and kissed her softly. It was a very tender yet passionate kiss. The man didn't want to push Elizabeth and take advantage of her, realizing that the adrenaline from today's adventures was now playing in her blood. Jacob slowly pulled away and looked Elizabeth in the eyes once more. "Elizabeth, I've told you before that you're a very good girl, so I don't want you to do anything rash that you'll regret. Go to bed. We'll come back to this another time." Jacob kissed her lightly on the forehead and left the room. Elizabeth went to bed and fell fast asleep. Jacob wondered how his life would turn out now and what he would do with Elizabeth. If on any other day he would have been happy to take advantage of her weakness, he couldn't do it now. This girl had become special to him, probably even more special than the Veronica he had once loved. The man decided that Elizabeth's attraction to him must soon pass and she would leave, leaving him alone. He just couldn't let any girl break his heart again. In the end, Jacob made a difficult decision. He told Elizabeth that he had to leave in the morning to take care of some business matters because he'd lost track of things, and now he had to catch up. Of course, that wasn't true. Jacob just wanted to leave Elizabeth alone to think things over. He was pretty sure that by the time he got back, the girl would be gone and everything would be back to normal. Jacob rented an apartment not far from his office, and at first he wanted to get out of the city, but he couldn't do that. The business required constant supervision and prompt action. Elizabeth stayed at Jacob's house. She called and texted him every day just to see how he was doing and if he planned to return. The man tried to ignore her calls and rarely responded to texts, citing his busyness, and in return messages, he usually wrote duty phrases, "Everything is fine," or "normal." Elizabeth wasn't offended by this attitude. He thought Jacob's business was really important, and she could wait until he was free. A month passed. During that time, Elizabeth had time to sort herself out and realize how she really felt about her husband. And if before the feelings had been caused by a surge of adrenaline, now she could appreciate the kindness and attention Jacob had shown her all the time they had spent together. Elizabeth looked at him with different eyes now. When they first met, marriage to Jacob had been the only option to save herself and her mother from the bandits. Now that Elizabeth was free to choose, she saw her husband as a male companion. Jacob was a good-looking man for his age, but he wasn't boring and understood what she was saying. Jacob had noticed lately that he waited for messages from his wife and was worried when she didn't write him anything. He even wanted to drop everything and come home, but changed his mind almost immediately, deciding that not enough time had passed for Elizabeth to make the right decision. He stalled, staying in the rented apartment, even though he really wanted to go home. At one point, Jacob even wanted to be distracted by another woman, but all his attempts failed. Everything seemed to be going well at first, but then he found himself thinking only of his wife and not even hearing what she was saying. In the end, he decided to return home. If Elizabeth had waited so long for him, she must really love him. Jacob decided not to tell his wife that he was coming home. He wanted to give her a little surprise. After buying a beautiful bouquet of flowers on the way, he went to Elizabeth's house. When he got home, he saw the following picture. Elizabeth sitting on the floor, sobbing quietly, with shards of colored glass all around her. Jacob dropped everything from his hands and ran over to her. "Elizabeth, sweetheart, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Did you cut yourself? Let me take you to the hospital." Jacob asked questions as he examined Elizabeth's body for cuts. The girl looked up with tears in her eyes. She seemed so small and defenseless at that moment. "I don't know how it happened," she said, stammering, and began to cry again. Jacob gently lifted her off the floor, put his arm around her and stroked her head. "Elizabeth, it's all right. Tell me what happened." "I don't know how it happened, but I snagged your vase. It must be very expensive." "Jacob, I'm sorry." Elizabeth cried again. "To hell with the vase." Jacob said so loudly that Elizabeth was quiet. "I'll buy you a dozen more if you want them." Elizabeth stood silently in Jacob's arms for a while, then pulled away gently and looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "I wanted to surprise you," Jacob smiled. "I did, but it was an unpleasant surprise." She grinned sadly. "Elizabeth, forget about that vase. I don't need it. I need you. And I'm very glad that you waited for me and did not run away." "Really?" Elizabeth asked incredulously. "Of course I am. Elizabeth, I want you to be my wife, my real wife. I want to keep you safe from danger. I want to hear your laughter every day and see your charming smile." Looking around, the man saw the flowers he had bought for his wife. He gently took Elizabeth's hands off of him and walked over to pick up the bouquet. "This is for you, though it's a little crumpled from the fall. But still, I think you'll enjoy it. Of course, if you want, I'll buy you other flowers right away." "Thank you. They're very pretty," the girl replied with a smile. She walked over to Jacob and hugged him again, their lips touching. The kiss was so sensual and tender. She wanted it to last forever. It was the first time they had ever been intimate. Elizabeth gave herself completely to the caresses of her husband, and he in turn tried to make her as happy as possible. From that day on, they began to live as a complete family. Elizabeth was glad that things had turned out this way, and even though her first encounter with Jacob had not been pleasant, she was glad that things had turned out this way. Jacob was glad, too, to have met Elizabeth's father, and he was grateful that she hadn't run away from him at the first opportunity. Elizabeth's mother was slowly beginning to get better, though she was still a long way from full recovery. The doctors recommended that she move to some small, quiet town near the sea, and John, of course, complied. He quit his job, took his wife, and they moved to the Black Sea. Jacob offered to buy them a house somewhere abroad, but Elizabeth's parents refused, wanting to stay in their native land. Elizabeth and Jacob often came to visit them and help them financially. After graduation, Elizabeth got a job at her husband's firm. He gave her a position in the International Relations Department, and she did very well. Despite the fact that everything seemed to have settled down and everyone was happy, this story left an indelible mark on everyone's soul. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.